Well, today we're looking at this short series on 1 year from now. What if we imagined our life a year from now and we're sitting here on the 21st of January next year? What would change in our life spiritually, as well as physically and every other way? What is it that we have to do now that would make a difference down the track? Not just tomorrow, but in a year from now, what would life look like? What would our church look like? So we've been examining, or we have started examining the rhythms and behaviours that help us grow into faith, that bridge the hypocrisy gap in our lives. The things we say, the things we do. The gap in the middle is kind of hypocrisy, and we've all got a gap in the middle. We've also been fessing up to some of the habits and behaviours that are keeping us from moving forward as a follower of Jesus. There are a million books that have been written about this in pop culture and in self-help sections and in the Christian world as well. These therapeutic books that kind of help us identify bad habits and good habits, or whatever they might be. There is always a list of the habits of successful people and the habits of unsuccessful people. As I read through that particular list, I realised that I do all of those things. Not just on one side, not just the yellow side, but on the blue side as well. There are times when I'm right into planning, and we're in planning mode now because it's January and we're going to meet with a Future Directions group on Thursday, and we're going to try and come up with a plan that God has given so that we might look forward. But I'm also, maybe like you, very open to being a procrastinator. To go, listen, I think that's going to be too hard. I'm going to say that person's no for them, or I'm going to wait until things get better, or I feel less tired, or whatever it might be. Organisation or giving up, time management, complaining, communicating, wasting time, all of those things. We are a mixture of all those things, and sometimes we wish our lives would be all about the yellow and nothing about the blue. But the truth is, we all have to kind of admit or commit to the fact that we are a mixture of all these things, and some things help and some things hinder our progress as followers of Jesus. In the New Testament, it talks about letting aside every weight that entangles us and snare that trips us up, so that we might make progress and move towards the goal. So that's what we've been talking about, and we're going to talk a little bit about those kinds of habits today. I was a really weird little kid. I'm probably a weird adult, but I was a weird little kid, and my bedroom walls kind of looked like that. I had posters of all kinds of people, mainly soccer people, because I grew up in Northern Ireland. I was born there in 1965, and by the age of 7, turning 8, we'd moved to Australia. But my strongest memory of my childhood, those years, is that I was obsessed with English football. I could probably name you, back then, all the players of all the teams. I had sticker books, I had posters and everything else. My very favourite player was this guy. Now, does anybody know who this guy is? No, it's not George Best. His initials start, it's K and K. Kevin Keegan. You ever heard of him? Kevin Keegan was my absolute favourite player. And I had magazines, that Shoot magazines, which I've cut off there. I had every copy of that from 1969 to 1981. If there was a fire in my bedroom, it was over. I was like the hoarder of these things. I was obsessed with football and obsessed with this guy, Kevin Keegan. Now, fast forward 20 years, I'm playing in the National Soccer League for a team called Marconi. That's the version of the A-League nowadays. And in 1985, my team, Marconi, announced that they were going in partnership with a local team called Blacktown City, and they were having as a guest for 4 games, Kevin Keegan. Now, I'm an up-and-comer and player and all that kind of stuff, and the boss of our particular team, a guy called Les Scheinflug, who's an Australian coach, he got us, some of us young guys, and we were all young then, into a room, and he said, "I've got good news for you." And I said, "What's the good news?" Me and there's 2 other guys. He said, "You are going to host Kevin Keegan for 2 weeks. You're going to be his Gophers." So whatever he says and whatever he wants you to do, if he wants you to clean his boots, you clean his boots. If he wants a sandwich, you get him a sandwich. But you get to train and you get to play. And if you're selected on the weekend, you'll be in the same team as Kevin Keegan. Now, to a person who is a football obsessive, used to be, a little less so now, that was like meeting my ultimate hero. So I remember the day. Kevin Keegan's only about 5'6" or 5'7", and when I met him, I was astounded at just his stature of meeting someone that famous. He was the England captain for a number of years and was one of the leading players in Europe, won European Footballer of the Year, did all these kinds of things with his team, Liverpool. But as I watched him, along with my other friends, in training and various other things, I noticed after only a few days that he had a particular series of habits that he would do. When he would warm up, he would do it in a particular way. When training was finished officially, he would stay on and do certain drills every day. This is a guy who'd played at the top tier of English football, international football, for about 18 years. To this day, I remember his day-to-day habits. And one of the things he said to us was this. He said, remember to do the simple things well. And that was such great advice for up-and-coming football people, because sometimes you think you get to a certain level that you don't have to do the simple things well. But it was the simple things done well that enabled Kevin Keegan to become really a soccer legend. Now, why I tell you all that is that good daily spiritual habits allow us to rise from procrastination to actually growing in our faith. One of the great ways to do that is to watch a highly skilled person and to see their habits and to allow some of those habits to rub off on us. One of the things I was thinking about in this series was about the Lord Jesus and what a day-to-day kind of existence was like for him. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. What were the daily habits, as best we can tell from the Gospels, that Jesus repeated? What was a day in the life of Jesus like? Because we know that he spent nearly 30 years doing the daily stuff of life. He would eat, he would sleep, he would play, he would work, he formed relationships, he had fun, he laughed, he sweated, he did all the things that we do in terms of the general human experience. He also performed many miracles, we know that, in that 3-year span between 30 and 33. But every day wasn't a day of extraordinary miracles. We do know that at the end of the Gospel of John, that if we were to write down all the good things Jesus ever did, there's not enough books and enough libraries that would fill the world to record them. But what was a daily day like for Jesus? Well, when you read the 4 Gospels, you begin to see some of the patterns and habits of Jesus' life. And Jesus used those habits in order that he might continue on in his mission. They were enablers of a greater mission. And of course, that was to die on the cross and to be raised to new life so that we too could be raised to new life. Jesus used a lot of analogies in his teaching regarding spiritual habits. This is one of them from the Gospel of Luke. And Luke records Jesus saying that no good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good that is stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. This is a statement of habits. A person produces good things from the treasury of good things that they store up. In other words, the result of those incremental good things in their lives, those habits in their lives. And what flows out of us, our speech and our actions, will be connected to what we have put in us. And healthy habits, like spiritual habits or healthy spiritual habits, are a way of investing good things into the soil of our life so that we can produce good things on an ongoing basis. So what are some of the patterns of behaviour producing? We can tell because of the fruit of our lives. If we're constantly angry about everything, then perhaps the things that we are angry about are the kind of the outcome of much deeper system or symptoms. When we look at the life of Jesus, he clearly had some clear patterns and rhythms to his life that enabled him to do what he did. I read this book, The Jesus Priorities. It's another one of those sort of habit-forming books, but it's a good book. But I noticed this quote in it, and I thought I'd share it with you, that says this, that isolated incidents reveal little about an individual, but reflecting on patterns of behaviour reveals the content of a person's character and the values that that person holds. The way we spend our time and resources is an expression of our values. Jesus told us himself when he taught us each tree is known by its own fruit. So reflecting on how Jesus spent his time should be instructive. What did he say over and over again, and what did he do repeatedly? What did Jesus do repeatedly? And the way that he spent his time reflected his values. So we can carry on about what our values are, but if our life doesn't demonstrate those values, then they're not values at all. They're just a signalling of virtue rather than living the virtue themselves. So I've written down a few of them and I thought I'd share with them. One of the patterns or behaviours I see regularly in the daily habits of Jesus is this word compassion. Compassion. Jesus seemed to have an abundance of compassion. Now, right there we can kind of go, well, that's Jesus, that's not me. But he seemed to have a well of compassion that never ever seemed to run dry. There's a couple of verses there. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing, be healed. You remember that incident? Jesus saw a huge crowd and stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. One of the characteristics of the daily habits of Jesus was compassion. That compassion characterized the way that he moved through life in the daily. One of the series that every preacher gets to preach is the steps of Jesus. In other words, where Jesus stepped, the journeys of Jesus, where it may be. But a better study is the stops of Jesus. If you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, that's a great thing to do in January if you've got a bit of extra time. Notice every time Jesus was on the way to do something else and he encountered someone and he stopped. Sometimes our lives can be all about the steps and not about the stops. And ministry and service is in the stops of Christianity. Compassion is something that seemed to eke out of Jesus. So one of those habit checks that I have to perform in January, because I don't do it in December because I'm too tired, like many of you, is I have to look at my schedule and question my schedule. Am I doing enough or am I doing too much? The reason I have to do that every January is that for too many years of ministry in my life, I was living at an unsustainable pace. I was going to every meeting on offer. I was doing everything I thought a good pastor should do all the time. And by about August every year, I fell in the ditch. And I hung on to December. So in the last dozen or so years, I've learned the hard way that I have to live and minister at a sustainable pace. Yes, there are times of busyness and all of that. Yes, there are times of less busyness. But I have to accept that both are on offer. And one has to trade the other in order that we might live a sustainable pace. When I sense myself losing that sustainable pace, one of the first things that leaves my heart is compassion. I start to resent people. I start to judge people. I start to think, pick your game up. What do you want me to do that for you? You could do that for yourself. Why do you need help from us when you could go out and all that stuff? But I know it. And so I've got into a better sustainable habit over the year so that I don't run out of energy by August, but also that my compassion well stays in good order. Now, sometimes the practicalities of that is saying yes. Yes, I will be involved in that. I will do this. I will minister there. I will do that. Part of the deal also is to say another beautiful word that God gave us, and that is not the word yes, it is the word no. Because if you start juggling 8 things, when you drop one, you drop them all. So a sustainable pace is the ability to say yes and to say no. We really want a culture here at TBC where you can say both those words with impunity. In other words, here is an offer to a baptism or a lunch or a dinner or a ministry or a service. You can either say yes or you can say no. No one is going to be knocking on your door if you say no. But you can't say no all the time. And you can't say yes all the time. We have to find the sustainable balance in our lives so that we might live our lives in that balance. I wonder what your capacity of compassion is now, right now. Mine's better now than it was in December, but that's tied to the busyness of the year and the expenditure of one's heart. We're in a season where more and more compassion is needed. Compassion comes from somewhere deeper than just adjusting our schedules. It comes from listening and keeping in step with the Spirit of God. Now, there are some other habits that we'll get to.
My end from the beginning, you see it all so clear. You're in my every moment, though why should I fear? I may not understand it, but you will lead me through. You won't forsake your promise, so I will trust you. All your plans are perfect. All your plans are perfect. All your plans are perfect, perfect for me. 'Cause 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 'cause
compassion is something that we fill our lives up with, and it's a strange thing. The more that we are compassionate, the more capacity we have to be compassionate. It's a bit like other things in our lives. So let me just explain a couple of other, or flag a few other habits of Jesus. One of them, of course, is prayer. Prayer is something that immediately we think, oh boy, I'm hopeless at this. I really suck at prayer. That's a theological position. But we know that Jesus prayed, and part of his habit was to early mornings. Jesus was an Anglican. No, he wasn't. Very early in the morning, not 10 o'clock, well, these soft Baptists, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, and left the house, and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. One of my daughters, her alarm goes at 4:45 every morning to go to the gym, and she's very fit. But man, I really admire the fact that you would get out of your bed at that time when I have probably 2 more hours. But anyway, Jesus, one of his habits was that habitually he would pray. Now, the time and the posture and all that stuff is pretty irrelevant, but I don't know about you, is that if I am going to absolutely do something, at 7 o'clock I'm about 90% sure I'm going to do it. That's the morning. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm no chance. So in other words, yeah, I'm going to go to the gym today. 7 o'clock, I'm going to go to the gym. I'll put it off to 9 o'clock. Oh, maybe I'll find a gap after lunch for an hour, or you know, by 5 o'clock, I'm home eating bread, you know. That's just me. But Jesus prayed. Some of his prayers were short. Some of them were asking for guidance and insight. Some of them were prayers with other people. Some of them were prayers of thanksgiving and praise. Some of them were born out of deep, deep anguish and pain. If we were to take the accounts of Jesus' life and reproduce them in a calendar, he would regularly block off these times intentionally to pray. Now, I don't know how you are with prayer. I have I have a kind of up and down relationship with prayer. So I often use the prayers of other people. I often journal in prayers, write stuff down. I often listen to prayers. I do all kinds of ways so that I can pray. I find that a bit of a challenge in my own life. But it was a keystone habit for Jesus. Now, there's all kinds of ways that you can pray. Prayer is basically communicating with God. And there's some tips. You can look that up. You can have some opportunities to pray. And we, as a church, are trying to be more intentional this year about having prayer meetings, times when we can gather together to pray and to be still before God and all that stuff. But prayer is an important and daily habit that we need to get into. A friend of mine has a little alarm goes off, and he's in ministry, at 10:02 every morning. Not during the service, but he gives himself a break because he's usually leading a service at 10:02 on a Sunday. But at 10:02, his phone has a little alarm at 10:02, and it reminds him to pray this prayer from Luke 10, verse 2. And the harvest is great, but the workers are few. He's a pastor like me, so he's praying as I'm praying that the Lord, who is in charge of the harvest, let's ask him to send more workers into the fields. And he just prays that prayer, and he moves on with his day. It's all over by 10:03. There's all kinds of ways, and we really have no excuse to not be in regular prayer, regular communion with God. Sometimes we do it here in a group, sometimes we do it alone, sometimes we do it with a friend. But how intentional you are about prayer can reflect on the health of your prayer life. And again, a bit like compassion, the more that you pray and you know the habit of praying, the more prayer will become part of the habits of your life. Here's a third one. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly. Jesus practiced generosity. Now, Jesus had nothing. He had no home to lay his head. He didn't have any physical resource. He didn't have a superannuation fund, or he didn't have a little bank account, he had nothing, right? But he was a generous person, not just generous with those around him, but also those who were not even part of his group. He practiced this abundance mentality, and he warned against the comfort of seeking security in money and things. In fact, famously, he said one time, you cannot worship both God and money. Not that it's hard to, but you cannot do it. He was a generous, and he had a mindset or a heart set of generosity. It's also a mindset that we can improve on, usually by being generous. Generous with time and resources and attention and listening and all that stuff that we can be generous about. We have a generous God who longs to give good and generous gifts to his children. Sometimes the blessings of God are so overwhelming to me, and I hope you have these moments, that I can barely take them in, because I know that I don't deserve any of it, you see. God is a generous God. Jesus did not live with a scarcity mentality. I kind of grow tired of the eyedropper approach to Christianity. You know, we kind of just give a drip, a drip, a drip. Yes, Jesus, you saved us from our sins. Yes, Jesus, you did for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. Yes, Jesus, you are the way, the truth, the life. Yes, Jesus, you died on the cross. But my response is a little drip, just a drip, just a little bit. He made the best wine for the wedding feast in Canaan. He loved generously and spent his time generously. We know that he was generous in his habits. The fourth one and the last one is this sense of humility. Even though he is the Son of God, following Jesus involves both the things we embrace and the things we resist. Too many people, like me, think it's sometimes about the latter rather than the former. I don't know what I'm for, but I can certainly give you a list of what I'm against. Well, that's not being a humble Christian. Whether washing feet or choosing seats assignments at weddings, Jesus modeled this posture of humility. Now, a posture of humility is not a posture of poor self-esteem. It's considering others as well as ourselves. There's an interesting verse in Luke 14. Jesus said, when you're invited to a thing, go and sit at the lowest place so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you'll be honoured in the presence of all who sit at table with you. In other words, when you walk into a room, don't just look for the best seat or to hang out with those that you think are worth hanging out with. Maybe cross the floor and have a bit of humility. You see, sometimes the answer is yes, and other times the answer is no. But if we always see serving God or even serving others as an interruption to my plans, my day, my time, my money, my life, then we'll never develop this great habit of humility. Jesus regularly ate with those who were considered outsiders. Now, it's fine and fun to be around people you like, and people who are easy, but why not try perhaps inviting someone who's not so easy and not so likable? Perhaps it would be great for them to be around a table with you instead of just the same people who you like. There's nothing against that. These are the spiritual habits that we can get into and increase. There's other spiritual habits that we won't get to today. This habit of compassion and prayer and generosity and humility. And perhaps 1 year from now, we'll be a little further on in our capacity to serve and to be the kind of people that God has called us to be. Building spiritual habits that are good help us grow in our relationship with God. They help us become more like Jesus, and they help strengthen our faith and overcome challenges and even temptation. So my prayer for me and my prayer for you, and I hope your prayer for me, is that we all do better in developing these spiritual habits.